For this behavior tip, we're going to be talking about the all-famous power struggle. This is a situation that drives all people to their end because it's so frustrating. A power struggle is an interesting interaction, and it takes two people to be involved in it. And basically it's two people struggling to make sure their will is the one that's in place. And the problem with them is it teaches very bad behavior for the rest of the person's life, and also the fact it really is, it wears people out and wears them down. The power struggle is used by all of us at some time, but there are some children who are very coercive. They will argue everything to the death, and it's just exhausting working with them. But part of the problem is we feed that behavior by our reaction. So there's a couple things that we need to remember on the power struggle. It always takes two to be involved in a power struggle. The second thing is generally no one wins, and for sure it will not be the caregiver. It will end up being the person that we're power struggling with. And the last thing about a power struggle is that we need to remember that if we refuse to participate in it, it's not going to happen. So in reality, we have a lot of the power. But many of us can't find that ability to back away from the situation because we want to prove our point or we want to exert our power over the person. This is particularly, sometimes people with various developmental disabilities are passive-aggressive power strugglers. They just don't get involved. I'm working with a lady who has some autism, well, has a lot of autism, but she's really great to work with, but in the past 6 months there's been a major problem with stealing, especially at our workplace. One of the issues I find after observing this for a while is that it really is, she's engaged in a power struggle with the supervisor. And she knows the more she steals, the more it gets the supervisor upset. So people can get really entangled in power struggles, and they just are not a good thing. A couple things that have to happen that we should recognize in a power struggle is the power struggle is an escalating cycle. It's an escalating chain of events that if people will stay in the power struggle with the person long enough, it will usually end in aggression of some kind, either verbal or physical aggression or aggression to objects. So you have John sitting here and you say, John, I need you to put your game away and come in now and get ready for dinner. And John just sits there and you say, I need you to do that. And then he just sits there. And then finally you say, this is it. I'm going to turn the TV off if you don't do it. And then he starts screaming at you, I hate you, I'm going to tell my dad on you, or I'm going to tell my mom on you, or I'm going to sue you. That's a common one. And what happens is after 10, 15, 20 minutes of this, usually the request maker just gives up. And you'll hear, I'm sure as a mom or a dad, you've said, fine, I'll do it myself. Well, that's what the power struggler is asking for. The other thing that research indicates is that 60 to 70% of the time, the request will be withdrawn. That gives a lot of power to the person that has learned to use power struggling to evade situations. So if you and I had 60% of the time a possibility of winning, neither one of us I wouldn't be making this and you wouldn't be watching it because we would be in Wendover because our odds are so good we could support ourselves. So we need to get rid of these power struggles and not participate in them. There's a couple things that you have to, that we need to look at when we look at power struggles. You have to change that escalation. When that person is, the first thing you want to do is have that ability to withdraw. So that person starts arguing, and if you know the person you're supporting and working with, you'll pretty much know their pattern, where it's going. So as that person starts escalating and they start saying they're not going to do it, you have to find a way to remove the stimuli. And we are usually the stimuli. So if we can give that person a 5-minute break or something instead of just keeping in there arguing, so that thing is escalating, what will happen is when you leave the room, that person has to come down a little bit because you've removed the stimuli for the power struggle. A lot of parents will say, yeah, but then they follow me and they're kicking on the bathroom door. And that is true. Sometimes that does happen. One of the things that I've learned over a lot of years working with people is sometimes we just do not want to show any empathy to the person. But my favorite technique is to do something like, wow, I can tell this means a lot to you. You really don't want to do this. Listen, I have to go to the restroom, and what I'm going to do in the restroom is, while I'm in the restroom, you can, I'm really not going to do anything in the restroom but sit there. But what happens is when you're in that restroom, it gives that person time to come down a little bit. And since he doesn't feel threatened, you're not being adversarial, you're not threatening him, you're not saying you're not going to help him. You're saying, hey, I can tell this means a lot to you, I'm going to think about this, let me go into the restroom and I'll be right back out. So wait 5 minutes, then come back out, and that will start again. Or maybe the person will be willing to work with you more. If he's willing to work with you, give lots of praise for following directions, for helping you, whatever it is. And I think sometimes we're afraid to negotiate with folks. People need to follow rules, they need to have clear expectations, but there's a lot of things we can negotiate with people to make it not such a terrible meltdown or problem for us. So we come back out and let's say that person starts escalating again. Well, I'm not doing it, I hate doing that, I'm not going to do it. Remove yourself again. I'll say, just a minute, maybe I have diarrhea, I'll be right back. And remove yourself again for another 5 minutes, because what you're doing is refusing to allow this escalation to go. Now, if you say things like that, I am not listening to you, I'm getting out of here, you can't do that way. Tons of times it will just keep going and going and going until people say things they don't mean. And this is involved in all relationships, spousal relationships, all family relationships. But take a step back and be able to show a little empathy. I'm going to try to help you. Let me do this. But every time you remove that stimuli, again, which is usually us, that person has to come back down. One of the things that you want to be able to do is look at sometimes just using an egg timer. When you've asked that person twice, then you just back away for a few minutes and let that person decide. And lots of times if you say, well, I have to leave, I hope by the time this egg timer, the bell rings, you'll be willing to go in and start making your bed, or whatever the request was. And then back away and then come back. At some point you have to decide whether to implement the consequence or not. And there will be eventually another behavior tip-up that will address how do we implement consequences appropriately. A couple things that work more successfully with a power struggle are, and we should be looking at, is number one, being willing to withdraw and remove that stimuli. Number two is do not keep asking the person over and over and over before you leave. You're going to make 2 or 3 requests. You have to kind of adjust that to the person's learning abilities, and then you're going to do that withdraw. The first request is, please make your bed, and he doesn't do it. Then you're going to establish another request. If he does that, you're going to highly reinforce him. If he doesn't, you're going to do another one and say, I need you to make your bed. And he starts arguing, then that's when you want to withdraw so that he doesn't have something to feed on. But don't just stay engaged. Do this, do that, do that. When you see the tip about consequences, we'll talk about doing consequences in a way in which people can save face, and we implement appropriate consequences. We do a lot of irrational consequences, so in the next few weeks watch for that little example. Power strugglers, you always want to make a direct request. That means when you make a direct request, you don't say, will you go clean your room? because if he says no, he has that ability or the right to say no. It's always, please clean your room, or I need you to clean your room. You don't state it in a question. The closer you are to the person, the better, because power strugglers love to have attention. So when everybody else is in the room and you're arguing with this person, you're just giving him the stage. Always establish eye contact. Try to be on the same level. If it's a smaller child, get down on the same level. Remember, only 2 requests. Keep your voice soft and in control. The softer it is, the harder he has to listen to you, plus the fact everyone else in the environment. Timing is critical. If that person is watching Cops, and Cops is their favorite TV show, don't ask them at that moment to stop and do that. Say, when this show's over, we're going to do that. I need you to help me with this. Use start requests. Instead of no, don't, and can't, say, I need you to sit down here and talk to me a minute. Or instead of saying no, you can't do that, give him a start request. Tell him something that he can do. Non-emotional versus emotional requests are critical with this situation. Be descriptive in your requests, and the critical one is reinforce all compliance.